Hi, I'm Stan Jones, creator of the Nathan Active Mysteries, and in a couple of minutes I will be reading you the first chapter of this book, White Sky, Black Ice. It was the first book in the series. But first, I'd like to say a little about the term Eskimo. As you may have heard, it's being replaced in formal speech and writing by the term Inuit. However, Eskimo is still in general use in Northwest Alaska, and that's the practice followed in the series. So, here we go. What's this first book, White Sky, Black Ice, about? Well, 2 suspicious suicides in the span of a week and rumors of trouble in the village and at the local copper mine lead Nathan Active to believe there's a killer at large. As a Nalakmiak, or someone regarded by the community as almost white, he must fight for every clue before the killer strikes again. And now here is chapter 1. Wednesday morning, Chukchi. Ordinarily, Alaska State Trooper Nathan Active didn't get involved with deaths inside the Chukchi city limits. But the city cops were all out, and he was flirting with Lucy the dispatcher when the call came in, so he took it. "You better get over here, Nathan," said Hector Martinez. "Some kid shot himself across from the Dreamland, and I want him moved." "Who is it?" "Don't matter who," Martinez said. "Just come get him. He's scaring away business." The bar owner hung up. Active climbed the stairs to his office, took his fur hat and down parka from the hooks by the door, and went out to the 8-year-old Trooper Suburban. The west wind that had set in yesterday scraped his face as he unlocked the driver's door and tossed in his briefcase. A thin gray belt of cloud scrolled overhead, spitting snow at the narrow tongue of beach gravel and tundra that contained Chukchi's square, unpainted wooden houses and its straggling dirt streets. He had arrived at work only an hour before, but already the Suburban's windshield was covered. The temperature was maybe 6 above, he judged, as he brushed off the snow. The warm spell of the past few days was definitely over. There were many things he had come to detest about Chukchi since the troopers had posted him there 18 months before, but it was probably the west wind he detested most. It was the west wind's toothache-like persistence. God help you if you had to go gloveless in it, changing spark plugs on the Suburban or working an evidence camera. It gnawed at your hands and sprayed grit in your eyes. Inside a house at night, you could hear it scratching bushes and weeds against the wall. You could feel it suck warm air out the cracks around the windows and push cold air under the door and through the electric sockets. Well, he could persist too. Another year or two and he figured he'd be promoted out of Chukchi to Alaska State Trooper headquarters in Anchorage, where his adoptive parents lived and where he'd been raised, and where, thank God, the west wind never blew like it did here in Chukchi, the village where he was born. He pulled out of the parking lot behind the public safety building, a 3-story stack of fading brown plywood siding and blue aluminum roofing. He drove up 3rd Street, the only paved road in town, turned right at Lake Street, then drove east a block and stopped across from the Dreamland. The Chukchi police van was already there, and 2 officers were walking toward something in a clump of willows, maybe 75 yards out into the tundra. The dispatcher must have reached the city cops by radio or caught one of them at home by phone. Several Honda 4-wheelers were pulled up beside Lake Street, too. A gaggle of breakfast drinkers watched the proceedings from the steps of the Dreamland. They were probably the business scared away from Martinez Bar. Active followed the city cops to where the dead man lay on his back near the edge of the Chukchi cemetery. He was young, his black hair was collar length, and he wore a small mustache. His legs were drifted over with snow, but his head and upper body, more sheltered by the willows, were only lightly frosted. There was a snow-covered rifle across his snow-covered legs, a bullet-sized hole in his throat, and a shadowy stain on the snow under his neck. Active was sure that, when they turned him over, they'd find a much larger hole where the slug had come out. "Mind if I take a look?" he asked one of the city cops, a white man named Mason. Mason nodded. "Just don't touch anything till the chief gets here." Active squatted and studied the rifle through its dusting of snow. It looked like an old 30-30 Winchester carbine, good for anything from seal to caribou, even moose. Most people nowadays had newer rifles that shot farther and hit harder, but 30-30s were still common in Chukchi, where nothing was thrown away if it still worked or might do again someday. Active stood up. There were some liquor bottles lying around, mostly plastic travelers that could be hauled in a boat, plane, or snow machine without breaking. But Martinez ran a package store next to the Dreamland, so the tundra nearby was always littered with bottles. How many of them had the boy with the hole in his throat emptied in his last hours? Active turned as footsteps crunched in the snow behind him. Jim Silver, the city police chief, stopped beside Active and studied the corpse. Silver was a tall, paunchy man with an acne-cratered face. He had been around Chukchi since before Active was born. Active imagined that Silver would still be there, like the west wind, when Active was long gone. "Another one, huh?" "Looks like it," Silver said. "The third suicide since the weather turned cold." "You know him?" "I think so, but let me check." Silver squatted and patted the boy's coat pockets, then reached into one and pulled out a photo ID badge by one corner. "Yep," he said after a moment's study. "George Clinton, one of Daniel's boys. Looks like he got himself a job at the Gray Wolf Mine." He waved the badge at Active, then tucked it back into the same pocket it had come from. "We'll move in pretty soon. We just need to get some pictures for the coroner. Not that there's much doubt what happened." "Well, you don't need me. I'm only here because Lucy couldn't find you guys at first." Active started toward the Suburban. "Actually," Silver said, "there is one thing." He turned, knowing what was coming. Silver was white, and so were the other city cops on the scene. He, Nathan Active, was Inupiat Eskimo, like George Clinton. "You got a minute to go by and break the news to old Daniel?" "Jim, I speak less Inupiat than you do. You know that." "Well, Daniel's English is pretty good." "How about one of the other guys?" Active jerked a thumb toward the two city cops starting to work over George Clinton's body. "I need them here for a while yet." Active shook his head and shrugged. "Where's the house?" Silver pointed across the tundra to the southeast. "That white one there, by the lagoon." "You owe me, Jim." "I owe you," Silver said. And that was the first chapter of White Sky, Black Ice, installment number 1 in the Nathan Active series. I hope you enjoyed it. You may be wondering, do I have to read the earlier books in the series to understand what happens in the later ones? The answer, I'm happy to say, is no, you do not. You can dive in wherever you like. Each book is a self-contained mystery, providing enough background on Nathan and on the series to work as a satisfying standalone read. I hope you enjoyed the Nathan Active stories. You can find out more about them and about me by visiting my website, sjbooks.com, or you can look me up on Amazon.